The smell of freshly turned earth and ripening tomatoes was the only thing that kept Arthur Vance sane in the suffocating perfection of the Whisper Ridge Homeowners Association. His small 2-acre patch of defiance, grandfathered in 40 years before the first McMansion rose from the clay soil, was the last bastion of true independence in the entire subdivision. His well, a relic of the original homestead, was the source of that independence pumping clear. Cold water that cost him nothing but the electricity to run the pump. But independence was the one thing Carolyn Finch, the HOA president, or the Empress of Polyester, as Art privately called her, could not tolerate. It started, as all bureaucratic nightmares do, with a registered letter. The thick, creamy paper smelled faintly of lavender and condescension. Whereas the existence of an unmetered, private water source within the common development area poses an undue risk to the communal aesthetic standards. And whereas the appearance of the pump housing constitutes a violation of Section 314, subparagraph B, structures unapproved for public view. Art had slammed the letter onto his kitchen table, the legalistic jargon blurring into a single infuriating accusation. The pump house, a sturdy, weather-beaten structure he'd built himself, was not an unapproved structure. It was a necessity. And Section 314 was a new rule, passed last year at a meeting he hadn't bothered to attend because HOA meetings, in his mind, ranked slightly below a root canal on the list of enjoyable activities. He'd driven straight to the HOA headquarters, a gleaming, offensively beige stucco building that looked like a bank, not a community center. He found Carolyn Finch in her glass-walled office, her silver hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful, her expression already set in a mold of bored disdain. "Art, dear," she said, not looking up from a ledger. "I told you, you need to call to make an appointment. We can't have residents wandering in unannounced." "I'm announced now," Art said, planting his hands on the expensive mahogany desk, rattling a crystal paperweight. "What is this garbage about my well?" "It's grandfathered." "You can't touch it. I have the original county zoning permit from 1982. Carolyn finally lifted her gaze, and her pale blue eyes held the flat, dead look of a shark. "That may be true, Art, but this is a community now. The original zoning permit covers the land use, not the aesthetic maintenance or the safety standards of the Homeowners Association. The association, by unanimous vote of the board, which again you chose not to attend, has deemed your well a liability. An unsightly one at that. A liability? It's water! The foundation of life. My vegetable stand feeds half this neighborhood, Carolyn. My irrigation runs on that well. And the noise of that pump interferes with the property values of the new development bordering your lot, as per the acoustic study we commissioned. We are offering you a very generous concession, Art. We will connect your property to the municipal water line free of charge and cover the first year of your water bills. All you have to do is sign the relinquishment form for the well, allowing us to decommission it properly." She pushed a thick packet of glossy paper across the desk. Art's face tightened. "Decommission? That's a fancy word for destroying my property, isn't it? It's about compliance, Art. Uniformity. That's why people pay a premium to live here. They don't want rustics hauling water out of the ground on their own time. They want harmony." Art shook his head, the anger bubbling up from his gut. "Harmony? You want total control. This well is the only thing standing between me and being dependent on your petty little fiefdom. I won't sign it. You can't make me." Carolyn smiled then, a small, tight, patronizing curl of the lip that felt like a slap. "Perhaps you should read Section 5.3, subparagraph C. Art noncompliance after 3 official warnings regarding any structure deemed a risk to property integrity or aesthetic standard permits the association to remediate the structure ex parte. The costs of said remediation, including the administrative surcharge, are then added to your annual assessment immediately due upon completion of the work." "You wouldn't dare," Art whispered, the blood draining from his face. "We're a community." "Art," she repeated, her tone chillingly devoid of emotion. "We have standards. You have until the end of the week to sign that form, or we will be forced to act." He didn't sign. He spent the next 3 days calling lawyers who specialized in HOA disputes, only to be quoted astronomical retainer fees that ate up the small savings he had put aside for a new tractor. They all told him the same thing. Fighting the HOA was a paper war, and Carolyn Finch was armed with an army of carefully crafted, ambiguous bylaws. On Friday morning, Art stood in his living room, staring out the window at his small but vital well house. He felt sick with dread, but also a stubborn, burning pride. He would stand his ground. He was ready for a fight, a legal one, a loud one, a public one. He was not ready for what actually happened. The roar of a diesel engine jolted him out of his early afternoon nap. It wasn't the sound of a dispute. It was the sound of a full-scale military-style operation. Art rushed outside. 2 commercial landscaping trucks were parked nose to tail on his lawn, crushing the edge of his prize-winning zucchini patch. Standing beside the well house was a concrete mixer truck, its enormous drum churning with a thick, sickly gray slurry. A crew of 4 men, wearing reflective vests that seemed to mock his simple, dirt-stained overalls, were already working. "What the hell is this?" Art roared, running toward the group. The foreman, a heavy-set man with a clipboard and a permanently bored expression, didn't flinch. "HOA job, man. Perimeter security upgrade. You're Art Vance?" "I'm Art Vance." "You get that truck off my property right now. You leave my well alone." The foreman, whose badge read Mike, consulted his clipboard. "Nope. Section 5.3, subparagraph C, fully compliant work order signed off by C. Finch. We're securing the unapproved structure, preventing aquifer contamination, and filling the void. Standard procedure, sealing it with a specialized 4,000 psi compound." Art could hear the pump house door being wrenched open. He lunged forward, grabbing the foreman's vest. "You can't pour concrete down my well. That's 30 years of water." "That's my only source." Mike shoved him back, his voice flat. "Hey, man, it's a sealed cavity now. Nothing getting in, nothing getting out. It's permanent. Don't make this difficult, Art. We just gotta cap it." Art watched, frozen in horror, as the crew backed the concrete truck up to the wellhead. The chute lowered, a thick gray tongue of cement scraping the grass. One of the workers jammed the nozzle into the well casing, the clean, perfect metal pipe that had fed his life, and the roar of the pump filled the air, quickly followed by the wet, gurgling sound of thousands of pounds of liquid concrete being dropped into the earth. It was not a fight. It was an execution. They weren't fighting him. They were obliterating his infrastructure. Art stood there, his lungs burning, screaming curses that were swallowed by the noise of the machinery, his hands clenched into useless fists. He watched until the last drop of cement had been poured, until the foreman signed off on the thick, smooth cap they laid over the top, and until the crew drove away, leaving behind nothing but the smell of diesel and the wet, unforgiving gray tomb where his water had been. That night, Art didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, staring at the patch of cement, which was already starting to cure into a rock-hard monument to corporate pettiness. The silence in his home was deafening. The tap in the kitchen sink was dry. His crops, the pride of his existence, would not make it through the weekend without irrigation. He called Carolyn at 2 a.m. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice crisp and annoyed. "You have reached the emergency line of the Whisper Ridge HOA. This call is being recorded." "What is the nature of your emergency, Art?" "You destroyed my property, Carolyn. You destroyed my well. I'm going to sue you, the board, and every single company that put that filth in my ground." His voice was shaking, not with rage yet, but with cold, devastating shock. "The nature of your emergency is a legal dispute, Art," she said calmly. "That is not a community emergency. We are connecting you to the municipal line tomorrow, as promised. Your property is secure. The matter is resolved. Have a good night." She hung up. The matter was not resolved. The municipal connection, when it finally arrived 3 days later, came with a new digital meter, a new monthly fee, and a severe restriction on outdoor usage, meaning his 2 acres of organic produce would have to be watered by hand with a hose for 10 hours a day, an impossible task. His farm was dying. The tomatoes were cracking, the zucchini leaves were yellowing, and the soil was turning into dust. Art walked the perimeter of his fence, his heart heavy with a grief that felt disproportionate for a well, but which was entirely appropriate for the loss of his self-reliance. He was defeated. He was dependent. He was just another homeowner now. He stopped near the back corner of his property, where the fence line bordered the association's crown jewel, the Olympic-sized, dazzling turquoise community pool. It was a place of endless, frivolous leisure, laughter echoing across the water, the scent of chlorine and expensive sunscreen drifting over his dying crops. They were floating on their backs, untouched by the drought they had engineered for him. They were wasting water while his garden gasped. He watched Carolyn Finch herself, wearing a ridiculously large straw. The pump's rumble died just before dawn. Art stood at the edge of his property, the industrial hose coiled neatly in the tall grass, his chest rising and falling in deep, measured breaths. He had worked for nearly 3 hours, moving enough of the liquefied slurry to turn the Olympic-sized pool from a shimmering blue jewel into a monolithic, opaque, dark brown lake. A faint, earthy, metallic, sweet stench, the signature of potent, fresh nitrogen, already hung heavy and low in the crisp morning air, carried by the dew point inversion right into the heart of Whisper Ridge. He felt no joy. Joy was too frivolous for this. He felt a cold, deep, primal satisfaction, the kind that came only from the total rejection of defeat. They had humiliated him with concrete. He had returned the favor with biology. He walked back to his house, the rising sun catching the thick, permanent concrete cap over his well, and smiled for the first time in a week. He knew what was coming. The dawn chorus in Whisper Ridge wasn't birdsong. It was the sound of leaf blowers, expensive lawn mowers, and the hushed, critical tones of high-net-worth residents beginning their day. The first scream cut through the quiet just after 7. It belonged to Tiffany Hayes, who lived in the mansion closest to the community center. Tiffany was on her phone, setting up her poolside yoga mat for her morning routine, when the smell hit her. Not just a bad smell, but a deep fundamental offense to the sinuses, something ancient and agricultural, layered with the chemical sharp edge of industrial-strength chlorine. She looked at the pool, where yesterday there had been a perfect, sparkling blue reflection of the sky. There was now a thick, unsettling stew. It was the color of strong coffee, with dark, floating islands of organic debris stubbornly refusing to sink. She shrieked again, dropping her phone, which skittered across the pristine paving stones. The pool was ruined. It was filthy. It was alive. Within 15 minutes, the hub of Whisper Ridge was chaos. Residents, drawn by the smell and the sight, gathered in bathrobes and designer athletic wear, holding their noses and whispering in horrified, accusatory tones. The pool boy, a young man named Manny who had been meticulously cleaning the filters, found the source, a thick, oily residue clogging the skimmers and a small, dark stain spreading from the deep-end drain. Manny, pale and trembling, called Carolyn Finch directly. Carolyn was a woman who saw the world in terms of order, quarterly reports, and property values. When Manny called her, his voice bordering on hysteria, she was reviewing the new architectural guidelines for roof shingles. "Manny, if the pH is off, add more shock." "Don't call me about routine maintenance," she clipped, her voice already strained with annoyance. "It's not the pH, Miss Finch. It's brown. It's thick. And the smell. It smells like a feedlot exploded. It looks like someone emptied a septic tank in it." Carolyn slammed her pen down. "Don't be ridiculous, Manny. I was there yesterday. It was spotless. Take a sample to the lab immediately. I'll be there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, Carolyn Finch pulled her pristine white SUV into the community center parking lot. She stepped out, her tailored blazer already feeling too tight, and was instantly assaulted by the overwhelming, concentrated stench. It was far worse than Manny had described. It wasn't just the odor of decay. It was the raw, aggressive smell of highly concentrated, fresh, organic decomposition, a smell that shouted of the country and the untamed earth. Everything Whisper Ridge had been built to sanitize and exclude. She pushed past the gaping residents, her face a mask of escalating fury, until she reached the poolside. She stared down into the fetid, churning brown liquid. It wasn't an aesthetic violation. It was an act of biological warfare. "The perimeter! Check the perimeter!" she barked, turning to Manny and a stunned-looking security guard. How could this happen? This is vandalism! Where did they come from? Manny stammered, pointing a shaking finger toward Art Vance's property line. The shrubs, ma'am. There's a disturbance in the shrubs along the Vance fence and, look, he pointed to the top of the fence, where the edge of a thick rubber hose had clearly scraped the vinyl coating. Carolyn didn't need to see the hose mark. She didn't need the lab results. She knew. Only one person in Whisper Ridge had the motive, the means, and the sheer, unadulterated audacity for this kind of action. She spun around, her eyes fixed on the distant, unkempt 2-acre lot where Art Vance's horses grazed. Call the police. Vandalism. Public health hazard. Contamination of community property. Get a team of landscapers here now to cut down those shrubs. And get the board on an emergency conference call. I want Art Vance evicted before sundown. Art was on his porch, slowly sipping coffee, watching the drama unfold through a pair of battered binoculars. He saw the gathered crowd, the frantic phone calls, and finally the arrival of the local police patrol car. He put the binoculars down and let out a long, slow breath. The opening was about to be breached. He heard the crunch of tires on his gravel driveway 15 minutes later. It wasn't the police. It was Carolyn. She had foregone the usual bureaucracy and come for the direct emotional confrontation. She was flanked by 2 members of the HOA board. Ken and Martha, a nervous real estate agent and a retired accountant, respectively, both looking terrified to be within smelling distance of Art's property. Carolyn stopped 10 feet from Art's porch, her hands trembling, though she held her posture rigidly straight. The smell of the decaying pool water, which had wafted down the hill, met the scent of the manure pile in Art's backyard, creating an olfactory wall that made Ken wince and cover his mouth. Art! Carolyn's voice was dangerously low, a tight thread of silk wound around steel. Look at me! Art slowly set his coffee mug down on the railing. He met her gaze. Good morning, Carolyn. Lovely day for a stroll, isn't it? Though the air seems a bit rich today. You did this. It wasn't a question. Did what? Art asked, feigning confusion. Are you referring to the state of your swimming pool? It looked lovely yesterday, though I must say the color palette has changed dramatically. Less Caribbean blue, more earthy outhouse. Don't play games. We found the hose marks on the fence. We found the biological contaminant. You pumped filth, horse manure, into the community pool. That is not just vandalism. That is criminal and a biohazard. You intentionally contaminated a water source. Art stood up, resting his hands on his hips. His eyes, usually crinkled with good humor, were sharp and cold. You find it ironic, don't you, Carolyn? You're complaining about the contamination of a water source. You seem to have forgotten that 3 days ago, you ordered a crew to pour over 3 tons of commercial-grade, non-biodegradable Portland cement down my own water source, contaminating my aquifer and destroying my means of survival. That was a legal remediation of an unapproved structure, she shrieked, finally breaking her composure. And this, Art gestured vaguely toward the direction of the stench, is the natural runoff from a legally permitted, grandfathered agricultural operation on my legally owned private property. Tell me, Carolyn, which Whisper Ridge bylaw specifically addresses natural agrarian seepage accidentally being drawn into an ornamental recreational pond via a faulty external pump? Ken, the nervous board member, coughed. Art, that's not seepage. That's clearly deliberate pumping. Prove it, Art challenged, his voice rising in power. The pump is back in my shed. The hose is coiled. Do you have video of me on my property operating my equipment? I woke up this morning, noticed the smell, and now I have to deal with the overwhelming stench of whatever's happening in your pool. Frankly, it's affecting my property values. I think I should file a complaint. Carolyn stepped forward, her face mottled with fury. This ends now, Art. The police are coming. You are facing felony charges for health endangerment. You will be held financially responsible for the complete draining, sanitizing, and possibly replastering of that entire pool. That will be in the 7 figures. You will lose your land, your horses, and everything you own. Art leaned closer, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that cut through the morning air. 7 figures, you say? And what's the cost of a full community public health alert? What's the cost of the news van showing up to report on the feces floaters of Whisper Ridge? You cement my life shut, and you think I'm going to roll over and pay for it? You just gave me a taste of absolute defeat, Carolyn. Now I'm giving you a taste of absolute disgust. The police arrived, questioned Art, but found no crime in progress. The pump was put away. The evidence was circumstantial. They took down a report, advised Art to cooperate with the HOA, and left. Smelling faintly of horse manure themselves, Carolyn, enraged, immediately convened the emergency board meeting at the HOA headquarters, now under a cloud of existential dread. Ken and Martha looked pale and defeated. "This is an act of domestic terrorism," Carolyn declared, pacing her office like a caged predator. "We must get a court order, a temporary restraining order, to keep him 50 feet away from that fence, and a civil lawsuit that puts his land into immediate receivership." "We need to shut him down!" Martha, the retired accountant, adjusted her glasses nervously. "We contacted the pool remediation company. They're called Clean Slate. The news is not good, Carolyn. I don't care if it's bad. Just tell me how fast they can fix it." The technician, a Mr. Diaz, said that due to the high nitrogen content of the sea, the conference room at the offices of Pierce and Stern, the HOA's formidable legal counsel, felt less like a place for negotiation and more like a tactical briefing center. The mahogany table was waxed to a ridiculous sheen, and the air conditioning was set low, lending a clinical chill to the room. Carolyn Finch sat opposite Art Vance, radiating controlled fury. Beside her was Mr. Stern himself, a man whose expensive suit and skeptical eyebrows suggested he was used to mediating disputes between millionaires, not arguing over liquefied horse droppings with a farmer. Art, meanwhile, wore his cleanest denim shirt and a cap, a calculated visual contrast that screamed honest dirt versus corporate polish. Mr. Stern opened with practiced gravity. "Mr. Vance, let's be clear. Your actions constitute gross criminal vandalism and contamination. We have photographic and chemical evidence. This meeting is solely to discuss the terms of your immediate financial restitution." Art leaned back, resting his hands behind his head. "Mr. Stern, I'm afraid you have it backward. This meeting is solely to discuss the terms under which I, Arthur Vance, agree to provide the necessary, legally permitted containment for 300,000 gallons of highly undesirable water that your client currently needs to dispose of immediately." He pulled out the laminated county permit, sliding it across the table until it stopped precisely in front of Carolyn. "Temporary on-site storage of non-hazardous agricultural drainage runoff. Permit approved last Tuesday." Carolyn snatched the paper, scanning the official county letterhead with mounting disbelief. "This is insane. You filed this permit after you poisoned the pool. I filed it before you came to my door waving your $800,000 lawsuit," Art corrected smoothly. "I was simply preparing for the inevitable runoff as any prudent farmer would. Now let's look at your options, as laid out in Exhibit A of your own legal threat." Art tapped the document. Option A, transport and disposal off-site. Cost $620,000. Timeline, minimum 3 weeks for scheduling the hazmat teams and securing disposal slots. He paused, letting the figure hang in the air. Or option B, on-site disposal into my permitted lagoons. No transportation costs. Immediate start. Timeline, 3 days to pump total. Now, that kind of emergency convenience has a price, doesn't it, Carolyn? Mr. Stern cut in, his voice sharp. "We will pay the fair market rate for agricultural pond storage. $2,000 a month, perhaps." Art laughed, a genuine deep rumble that seemed to shake the mahogany table. "2,000? Mr. Stern, that water is closing the community center for a year. It's creating a massive public relations headache. That's not storage. That's an emergency bailout. My price is not a rental fee. It's a settlement." He placed a single sheet of paper on the table. He had handwritten the terms. Terms for on-site containment and non-reporting agreement. Carolyn read the list out loud, her voice cracking with every word while Mr. Stern leaned over her shoulder, his face growing paler with each demand. Waiver, immediate and permanent dismissal, with prejudice of all civil claims and lawsuits against Arthur Vance, past, present, and future, pertaining to the well house, and the pool contamination. Well restoration. The HOA will contract and pay for the complete. professional and certified removal of all Portland cement from the well casing, and the full restoration of the well and pump system to its pre-existing functional state, under Art Vance's supervision. Water rights. The HOA will legally amend the CC&Rs to explicitly define and permanently protect Art Vance's grandfathered private water rights, including the right to drill new wells within his 2 acres, guaranteeing future independence from municipal services, cash payment. A one-time payment of $150,000 for the environmental impact and disruption caused by the wells, destruction, and the subsequent emergency storage of their waste. $150,000? Carolyn exploded, leaping to her feet. And we have to uncement your well? We pay you to clean up your own filth. You are trying to extort us. I'm offering you the cheapest, fastest, and most legally defensible path out of a biohazard catastrophe, Art corrected, never raising his voice. You pay me $150,000, which is less than a quarter of the cost of off-site disposal, and you get your problem literally off your hands. If you refuse, I wait. You spend $620,000 on transportation, face the guaranteed residence revolt, and I still sue you civilly for the destruction of my well, which is an open and shut case of property damage. Mr. Stern put a calming hand on Carolyn's arm. He had already mentally calculated the costs. Art's deal was, financially, the only logical choice. Mrs. Finch, the cost savings alone make this unavoidable. We can't dump this volume in the sewer. This man has us over a barrel. Carolyn stared at Art, her eyes blazing with hatred and humiliation. She saw not a triumphant farmer, but a triumphant peasant who had defeated the queen with nothing but dirt and paperwork. Fine, she hissed, her voice barely audible. We accept the terms. But you will not see a dime, nor will that cement be touched until every last drop of that filth is safely on your property. And I will have an independent engineer monitoring your lagoons for leakage every hour. If one drop contaminates the aquifer, I will personally see you bankrupted. That's the agreement, Carolyn, Art said, standing up. My land is designed for farming. Your pool was not designed to be a septic tank. Let's see whose infrastructure holds up better. The draining began the next morning. It was a spectacle of suburban degradation. Clean slates, enormous pumps, brought in under cover of darkness, began the slow, agonizing process of pulling the rancid mixture out of the pool. Art's property, meanwhile, had been transformed. Using his small tractor, he had reinforced the clay banks of the 3 pre-dug shallow lagoons, lining them with heavy-duty black plastic sheeting to meet the permit's environmental standards. The lagoons, positioned near the back fence, looked like 3 massive, sinister puddles waiting to be filled. A huge 6-inch flexible pipe ran from the pool over the HOA fence and across Art's field. When the pumps engaged, the pipe shuddered and began to flow. It was horrifying, yet mesmerizing for the residents. They lined the fence line, gagging and whispering, watching as the vast, expensive pool slowly, dramatically emptied. The water, the color and consistency of chocolate milk, gushed onto Art's land, spreading out into the black-lined lagoons. The smell was the primary antagonist. It was not merely foul. It was pervasive, clinging to clothes and hair. It turned the Whisper Ridge Community Center, a place of yoga classes and children's swim meets, into a ghost town. Houses bordering Art's property had to close all their windows and run their central air on filtration settings. Carolyn Finch was there every second, directing the clean slate crew, her face pale, her jaw locked tight. She had hired a drone operator to film every moment of the draining, ostensibly for evidence, but mostly to document her self-inflicted hell. On the second day, the local news showed up. A helicopter hovered briefly overhead, filming the stark contrast. The huge, beautiful, empty, brown-stained pool on one side of the fence, and the 3 massive, stinking black ponds filling rapidly on the other. The segment ran at 6 p.m. Suburban spat turns into bio-crisis. HOA president in concrete manure feud. The pressure on Carolyn became instantly unbearable. Her phone did not stop ringing. She took an emergency call from Mr. Stern right there at the poolside, surrounded by the stench. Carolyn, the press is calling this the Great Whisper Ridge Dump. We have to issue a statement. We need to frame this as an isolated incident, an act of calculated vandalism, and stress that the board is acting decisively. We are acting decisively, she hissed into the phone, swatting away a fly. We got him to store the filth. We cut our costs by $500,000. The residents don't care about costs. They care that their investment is now defined by the smell of horse feces. We have 6 immediate resignations from committee members, and 4 different homeowners have formally requested an extraordinary meeting to vote on the removal of the entire board. She hung up, shaking. Her power was evaporating like the rancid water. The residents weren't afraid of her lawyers anymore. They were just disgusted and wanted their lives back. Art watched from his porch. His garden, finally attached to the municipal line, was getting just enough water to survive. His horses, Jasper and Gideon, were oblivious to the political turmoil, munching hay happily in their pen. Late on the 3rd day, the pool was finally empty. The bottom was lined with a thick, slimy residue that would require days of pressure washing and ozone treatment. The lagoons on Art's land were full, a dark, silent monument to his victory. Clean Slate's foreman signed the release. 300,000 gallons contained. Mr. Stern's office sent the wire transfer for the $150,000 to Art's account and initiated the concrete removal process. Art had won the first round, financially, legally, and psychologically. A week later, the specialized crew had managed to break through the concrete seal on Art's wellhead. It was a tedious, loud, messy process, chipping away at the dense cement that clogged the casing. When they finally broke through to the water table, Art felt a rush of relief. The well was intact. The pump was repairable. His independence was returning. Carolyn, however, had disappeared from the HOA office. She had stepped back from her duties, claiming stress leave. Art knew better. She was plotting The threat against Jasper and Gideon was a punch to the gut. Art didn't feel the cold calculation of revenge anymore. He felt the hot, sickening panic of a man defending his family. The horses were more than livestock. They were his last connection to a life free from the suffocating pretense of Whisper Ridge. He scanned the legal petition again. The filing by Blackwood and Hayes was airtight, leveraging the known facts, the overwhelming stench, the proximity of the contaminated material, the lagoons, and the potential for disease vectors. The 48-hour clock was ticking down to a visit from County Veterinary Services and Animal Control. If they found a plausible risk, seizure would be immediate. Art knew he couldn't just move the horses. That would be an admission of guilt. He had to eliminate the threat, the lagoons, or repurpose them legally before the inspectors arrived. He picked up the phone. The $150,000 from the HOA was sitting in his bank account. It was blood money, and now it was going to be weaponized for defense. His first call was to Farmer Greg, 30 miles away, who specialized in used commercial-grade irrigation equipment. Greg, I need a lateral move irrigation system. Not sprinkler heads, I need the big high-pressure spray cannons. I need it set up to draw from a shallow cistern, and I need it operational by tomorrow morning. Art, you talking about a quarter-mile line? That's commercial farming territory. What are you watering? Greg asked, bewildered. I'm watering 2 acres of the angriest soil in the county, Greg, and I'm paying cash. Triple the list price if you can have the whole setup here, installed, and running by 9 a.m. tomorrow. His second call was to a pump specialist. He needed the well crew to prioritize the installation of the restored pump. But with a critical modification, the new system needed an intake line that could divert the well's flow and, crucially, a parallel line that could draw from his lagoons. The lagoons are agricultural runoff, right? The pump tech asked cautiously. Yes, and I need to use it for immediate irrigation of my fields, per county agricultural code, Art confirmed. It's a nutrient application system. Art spent the next 36 hours working without sleep. A team of 3 men arrived at dawn, their diesel truck smelling faintly of grease and tobacco. A welcome, rough scent in the hyper-clean air of Whisper Ridge. They worked like a military unit. The high-pressure spray cannons were mounted on movable dollies, towering 15 feet in the air. The main line ran from the deepest lagoon, a dark, pulsing artery, across the center of Art's 2 acres. When the technicians finally rigged the system and threw the switch, the sound was immense, a grinding pump followed by the roar of water being atomized into a fine, choking mist. This wasn't gentle watering. This was an industrial process. The liquid being sprayed was the HOA's own contamination, horse manure diluted by 300,000 gallons of chlorinated pool water. It was the perfect, potent fertilizer for his soil, which was starved for organic matter. But more importantly, it was actively, violently emptying the lagoons, reducing the biohazard risk to a harmless, wet field. And the smell. The previous stench of the stagnant pool had been localized and heavy. This new smell was worse. Atomized by the high-pressure nozzles, the airborne particles of decomposing nitrogen and chlorine residue were carried on the slight western breeze. It didn't just smell bad. It tasted metallic and heavy. By the afternoon of the second day, Art's fields were saturated, glistening black under a thick, acrid cloud. The lagoons, rapidly shrinking, were now less than half full, with the remaining liquid too shallow to pose a viable health risk to a horse. The confrontation arrived precisely at 2:00 p.m. on the 48-hour deadline. 2 official county animal. Control trucks pulled up to the gate, followed closely by a sleek, black sedan belonging to Tiffany Hayes and, pulling up cautiously behind her, Carolyn Finch, who had abandoned her stress leave for the satisfaction of Art's ruin. The county official was a formidable woman named Agent Reyes, clad in a khaki uniform, her face serious and professional. She didn't look like someone who would be swayed by legal maneuvering. "Mr. Vance, I am Agent Reyes, County Veterinary Services. We are here to conduct a mandatory welfare inspection regarding the proximity of hazardous waste to your livestock." Her voice was clipped and businesslike. "Welcome, Agent Reyes," Art said, gesturing expansively. He was exhausted, his eyes bloodshot, but he stood tall, radiating quiet confidence. "I'm glad you're here. I've taken emergency agricultural measures to mitigate the issue. Please, observe the premises." Tiffany Hayes stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger toward the rapidly emptying lagoons, which now looked more like muddy ponds. "Agent, look at this! This is a clear health hazard. The residual stench alone is inhumane. Our veterinary consultant says the insect risk is paramount." "Ms. Hayes, you filed the petition, correct?" Agent Reyes asked, her gaze sweeping from the lagoons to the enormous irrigation cannons running full tilt. "Yes. He's trying to hide the evidence by dumping it on his lawn. Actually, I'm applying a potent agricultural fertilizer to my fields, which is the legal and intended purpose of this type of farm runoff storage, as permitted by County Environmental Services," Art countered smoothly, showing Reyes the signed permit. "The lagoons are now shallow enough that they pose zero risk of entrapment or drowning, and the organic material is being quickly incorporated into the soil. I've reduced the standing surface area by over 60% in less than 24 hours. Agent Reyes walked past the lagoons toward the horse enclosure. Jasper and Gideon stood calmly, munching hay from a freshly filled trough, completely unbothered by the low drone of the pumps. She checked their coats, their eyes, and their feed. They were healthy, well-fed, and calm. She then turned her gaze to the irrigation cannons, which were currently arcing their thick, dark spray 50 feet into the air, creating a heavy, stinking atmospheric vapor. "Mr. Vance," Reyes said, squinting into the mist, "I note that your livestock is in excellent condition. There is no evidence of immediate neglect or cruelty. However, the odor is extreme and undeniably due to the contents of those lagoons. While you are within agricultural code, the proximity of the airborne contaminants is a valid concern." Art nodded, ready for the counter. "It is, Agent, but let me ask you, where are the prevailing winds carrying this airborne contaminant?" Before Reyes could answer, Carolyn Finch stepped out from behind Tiffany, clutching a silk scarf to her nose and mouth, her eyes watering. "They are carrying it over our homes, Art. You're polluting the entire neighborhood. We will file a separate suit for public nuisance and air contamination." Art turned to Carolyn and Tiffany, his expression darkening with a triumphant cold rage. "Air contamination? Public nuisance? Carolyn, I'm spraying your filth. That smell is the 300,000 gallons of pool sludge you forced me to store on my property after you destroyed my well." And as for the prevailing winds, Agent Reyes, you'll note that the wind is carrying the spray, the stench, and the aerosolized fecal particles directly over the Whisper Ridge development. He paused, letting the wind carry a fresh wave of heavy vapor right over the women. Tiffany gagged, turning green. It's being carried over the homes of Ms. Hayes and Ms. Finch, who filed this petition claiming their animals, my horses, were at risk from their own waste, Art continued, his voice ringing with absolute moral clarity. They used this waste to try and seize my family. Now, thanks to my agricultural remediation efforts, their own waste is literally raining down on their properties. I am operating entirely within my legal agricultural rights. The only way to stop the smell is to empty the lagoons, which I am doing. The only people suffering the most extreme effects of this public nuisance are the people who created and stored the contaminant in the first place. Agent Reyes stared from Art to the two pale, visibly miserable HOA women. She was a professional. She didn't care about their feud, only the law. Art had successfully converted the health hazard, stagnant pool water, into a legal agricultural application, spray fertilizer, thus saving his horses. The HOA's new petition was dead on arrival. Agent Reyes closed her notebook. Mr. Vance, your horses are secure. We have no grounds for seizure. Ms. Hayes, I will be reporting that the source of the alleged health hazard is currently being mitigated through standard agricultural application, and that the livestock is in satisfactory condition. If you feel this constitutes a public nuisance, that is a civil matter for the city health department, not animal control. She gave Art a barely perceptible nod of respect, turned, and walked back to her vehicle. Carolyn Finch was defeated, not by money or lawyers, but by the stench of her own failure. Her attack on Art's family had simply resulted in a new, continuous, and highly visible method of contaminating her own neighborhood with her own filth. Art looked at the two women standing there, helpless, smelling the fine, potent spray hitting their expensive suits. You tried to take my horses, Carolyn. You used my own necessary defense against me. Now, you'll get to smell the consequences of your actions every time the wind blows. The aerosolized filth system ran for 3 continuous days, fueled by Art Vance's relentless, quiet desperation to save his horses. The effect on Whisper Ridge was catastrophic. The stench was not merely an inconvenience. It was a physical contaminant, settling like an oily dust on everything. It coated the vinyl siding, seeped into air conditioning ducts, and clung to expensive imported fabrics. Open houses were canceled, Amazon delivery drivers refused to leave their trucks, and the collective delusion of the community's pristine perfection shattered. The extraordinary board meeting, convened on the evening of the 3rd, day was less a governance session and more a public execution. Residents, many wearing surgical masks, packed the common room, their faces etched with disgust and rage. The first to fall were Ken and Martha, the board members who had nervously flanked Carolyn. Ken, pale and sweating, announced his immediate resignation, citing irreconcilable differences regarding community management and environmental exposure. Martha followed suit, her voice shaking as she threw her keys onto the table. They were fleeing the wreckage Carolyn had created. Carolyn Finch stood alone at the podium, stripped of her supporting cast, looking impossibly small against the backdrop of the enormous, empty pool visible through the community center's panoramic windows. Her crisp suit was slightly rumpled, and the effort it took to maintain her rigid posture was visible in the tick beneath her eye. A furious resident, a retired financial executive, pounded his fist on a nearby table. "We are losing hundreds of thousands in equity. This stench is unlivable. You let this farmer use our money and our laws to turn our neighborhood into a toxic landfill. What is your plan, Carolyn? When does the spraying stop?" Carolyn fought to project control. "The legal options are limited. He is operating within agricultural code. The only way the spraying stops is when the lagoons are empty, and that is a necessary step to mitigate the biohazard. We must stand strong and hold him accountable for the initial—" "Accountable for what?" Another resident shouted, pointing an accusatory finger. "Accountable for responding to the illegal destruction of his well? We never voted on cementing his well." "You did that, Carolyn." "You wanted to humiliate him, and instead, you've humiliated every single person who invested in this community. The vote of no confidence was swift, brutal, and unanimous. Carolyn Finch was removed from the presidency and the board, effective immediately, her reign ending not with a dignified resignation, but with a public rancid revolt. She left the meeting without a word, her face a mask of porcelain hatred. The $823,500 lawsuit she had threatened Art with now resting squarely on the HOA's balance sheet as a self-inflicted wound. The next morning, Art was standing by his irrigation cannon, supervising the final 2 hours of spraying. The deepest lagoon was a thin, muddy expanse. The vast majority of the pool contaminant had been atomized and spread across his property, enriching his soil while punishing his enemies. He heard the screech of tires and the slam of a car door. It was Carolyn. She hadn't come in her SUV. She had driven an unmarked rental sedan, her appearance disheveled. No blazer, hair pulled back haphazardly. She looked like a woman who had spent the night staring at the ceiling and watching her life burn down. She stumbled to the edge of Art's fence, ignoring the operating spray cannon, which was currently arcing a powerful stream of dark, viscous liquid into the air. "It stops now, Art!" she shrieked, her voice hoarse. She climbed over the fence, her shoes sinking into the newly saturated, manure-rich earth. "You won! You took the money! You saved your horses! You destroyed the board! Why are you still running this disgusting thing?" Art calmly walked toward the fence line, staying a safe distance from the cannon's arc. "It stops when the job is done, Carolyn. The permit requires I empty the storage lagoons to prevent stagnation. I'm simply complying with the law, as I was advised to do by your lawyers." Carolyn pulled a set of heavy, industrial cutters from her pocket, the same type the well-cementing crew had used to snip the original water lines. Her eyes were maniacal. "Then I will end it myself. I will cut the line, and you'll have a violation, and the county will take your property." She stumbled toward the main intake hose running from the shallow lagoon to the pump, her focus entirely on severing the plastic. Art watched her, his expression grim. "That hose is under extreme pressure, Carolyn." "It's feeding the cannon," she ignored him, leveraging the large cutters around the thick, pulsating line. Snip. The hose didn't sever completely, but it ruptured violently. The high-pressure stream, a concentrated mix of sludge and residual chlorine, hit Carolyn Finch with the force of a fire hose, knocking her off her feet and sending her sprawling backward. She landed, not on the saturated earth, but directly into the deepest, muddiest part of the final low-lying lagoon. She disappeared beneath the thick, opaque surface for a heart-stopping second before struggling up, gasping, her clothes, hair, and face completely saturated and dripping with the vile pool effluent. She scrambled out, choking and weeping, covered head to toe in the liquefied remains of the pool she had been so desperate to protect. Art didn't move to help her. He simply stepped closer to the fence. "That was a very expensive bath, Carolyn. That material is highly concentrated. You'll need emergency medical attention for chemical exposure and a hazmat cleaning crew for your clothes." Carolyn, blinded by the sludge, screamed a soundless, animalistic cry of absolute defeat. The incident was quickly reported as an unfortunate trespassing and property damage attempt by a former HOA resident. Carolyn Finch was taken to the nearest hospital for decontamination and observation, suffering from severe chemical conjunctivitis and contact dermatitis. Her clothes, soaked in the nitrogen-chlorine mix, had to be incinerated. Her final, desperate attempt at sabotage only resulted in her being physically enveloped by the very filth she tried to weaponize against him. The ultimate visceral karma. 3 days later, the lagoons were completely dry. Art shut down the irrigation cannon and began the process of tilling his newly fertilized soil. A new HOA board, made up of cautious, apologetic residents, wired Art the remaining funds for the well restoration and sent a heavily notarized document confirming the permanent protection of his water rights, precisely as he had demanded in his settlement. The new board's only request was a single pleading line: "Please, no more manure." Art stood with his well crew, watching the powerful new pump surge to life. Water, clean, cold, pure water from the deep aquifer, gushed into the tank. The initial destruction had forced him to drill deeper and seal the casing more securely. inadvertently making his water supply superior and less vulnerable than it ever was. He was independent, wealthy, and legally untouchable. He walked over to Jasper and Gideon, who lowered their heads for a scratch. He was home. As for Whisper Ridge, the pool sat empty for 18 months, a brown-stained monument to a disastrous power play. The former community center president, Carolyn Finch, sold her house at a massive loss 6 months later, unable to endure the subtle, persistent smell that seemed to cling to the area, a phantom limb of the great biohazard. The final act of irony came a year later. Art Vance, leveraging his new water security and his richly fertilized land, opened a small roadside stand, completely visible from the main Whisper Ridge entrance. He sold 2 items: high-quality hay grown on his supercharged soil and his own custom-blended organic premium fertilizer. The sign, painted in clear, bold letters, read, "Vance Farms Premium Nutrients, ask us about our exclusive, community-tested blend." And across the street, a new, massive sign went up on the Whisper Ridge development entrance, the black script now looking small and desperate. Whisper Ridge, luxury living, new board in place, community pool opening, summer of 2026. Art stood on his porch, watching a new resident pause at the Vance Farm sign, before nervously driving into the HOA gates. He had his land, his water, his horses, and his freedom. He had not just survived the HOA. He had become a necessary, profitable fixture at their gates, built on the ruin they created.